You left a sandwich on the counter for 10 seconds. You were reaching for a napkin. When you turned back, the plate was empty and your dog was on the other side of the kitchen, chewing with an expression that suggested nothing had happened. Or maybe it wasn't food. Maybe you walked into the bedroom and found your pillow on the floor, gutted, its stuffing scattered across the carpet like evidence your dog had no intention of cleaning up. Or maybe it was quieter than that. Maybe your worn t-shirt disappeared from the back of a chair and you found it in your dog's bed an hour later, unharmed, just claimed. These all look like the same thing. Your dog took something, but they're not the same thing at all. The dog on your t-shirt, the dog with the destroyed pillow, and the dog that ate your sandwich are each running completely different psychological programs. And when researchers put dogs into brain scanners and design controlled experiments to study these moments, what they found turns "my dog is being naughty" into something far more complicated and far more interesting. It smells like you. The quiet kind of stealing is the one people misread the most. Your dog takes a worn t-shirt, carries it somewhere soft, and lies on it. No chewing, no damage, just contact. In 2015, neuroscientist Gregory Burns and his team at Emory University published a study in the journal Behavioral Processes. They placed 12 dogs into an fMRI scanner and exposed each one to 5 different scents: the dog's own, a familiar dog's, a stranger human's, and a familiar human's. The familiar human's scent produced the strongest activation in the caudate nucleus. That's the brain region tied to reward and positive anticipation, stronger than food, stronger than other dogs. A familiar smell, yours or anyone your dog knows well, activates the same neural pathway that fires when it expects a treat. A worn shirt isn't clothing to your dog. Neurologically, it's a concentrated dose of someone it loves. Veterinarians have built practices around this for years. When a dog is hospitalized overnight, the standard protocol is to leave an item carrying the owner's scent in the kennel. Not as a sentimental gesture, because it measurably reduces cortisol levels, lowers heart rate, and decreases restless behavior. Your scent to your dog's nervous system functions like a mild anxiolytic. The dog on your t-shirt didn't steal your t-shirt, it went and found the strongest comfort signal available in the house. The best game they ever invented. Then there's the kind of stealing that comes with eye contact. Your dog picks up the TV remote, stands perfectly still, and looks at you. It doesn't run, it waits. What it's waiting for is your reaction, because the last time this happened, you stood up, said its name in a very specific voice, and moved toward it. You dropped everything and engaged completely. And from your dog's perspective, that was spectacular. The remote was irrelevant, your reaction was the prize. This is operant conditioning at work. The dog performs an action, the environment delivers a consequence, and if that consequence is rewarding, the behavior strengthens. But the reason this particular behavior becomes almost impossible to undo is something behavioral psychologists call a variable reinforcement schedule. You don't respond the same way every time. Sometimes you chase, sometimes you trade a treat, sometimes you ignore it, sometimes you laugh. That inconsistency is the most powerful reinforcement pattern in behavioral science. It's the same mechanism behind slot machines. The unpredictability of the payoff makes the behavior harder to extinguish, not easier. And the sprint through the house afterward, the wide loops with a sock in its mouth, the glances over the shoulder to make sure you're watching, ethologists classify that as keep away, a documented form of social play. In puppy ethograms, keep away appears alongside play bows and exaggerated approaches. Your dog didn't defy you, it invited you to play, using the most reliable strategy it knows, picking up something you'll react to. Bred to grab. There's a reason some dogs do this constantly and others barely bother, and the explanation goes back thousands of years before any individual dog was born. Every domestic dog carries a behavioral chain inherited from wolves that ethologists call the predatory motor sequence. Orient, eye, stalk, chase, grab, bite, kill, dissect, consume. Wolves run the full chain, but selective breeding across millennia has amplified certain stages and suppressed others depending on what each breed was designed to do. Herding dogs were bred for intense eye and stalk with grab phase nearly removed, which is how a border collie controls sheep without injuring them. Retrievers were shaped for the opposite, a soft, persistent grab and carry with the kill and dissect phases completely suppressed, which is how a Labrador brings back a bird without destroying it. Terriers were built around a powerful grab and shake, the kill-bite stage deliberately amplified. In 2024, a study published in PLOS ONE led by researcher Miquel Delgado analyzed behavioral data from over 73,000 dogs using the CBARC database. Retrievers, spaniels, and pointers were dramatically overrepresented among dogs that compulsively fetch and carry objects. That same grab and carry impulse doesn't care whether it's a tennis ball or your slipper. When your golden retriever trots through the living room holding your shoe looking deeply satisfied with itself, that's not misbehavior. That's a working trait engineered across centuries of selection with no job left to do. They know when you're watching. Food theft operates on a different level entirely, and the research behind it reveals something about your dog's mind that might genuinely surprise you. In 2013, researcher Julianne Kaminsky and her colleagues at the Max Planck Institute published a study in the journal Animal Cognition. They tested 84 dogs in a setup where food was placed in a room and a human forbade the dog from taking it. Then they varied the lighting across trials. Dogs took roughly 4 times more food when the room was dark than when it was lit. The critical detail? The variable that predicted stealing wasn't whether the dog could see the food, it was whether the human could see the dog. A separate experiment by Brower, Call, and Tomasello, published in Applied Animal Behavior Science, confirmed the same pattern using physical barriers instead of lighting. Dogs consistently took food from positions where the human sight line was blocked. That is not impulsiveness. That is perspective taking. Your dog is constructing a model of what you can and cannot perceive, and adjusting its behavior based on that model. Counter-surfing isn't a failure of obedience, it's a display of cognitive flexibility that you'd probably never associate with the animal currently eating your dinner. The difference between collecting and destroying. There's a distinction buried in all of this that changes everything about how you respond, and almost nobody makes it. A dog that carries your slipper to its corner and falls asleep on it is engaged in low arousal comfort behavior, a modern expression of ancestral caching, the instinct to gather and store things of value. A dog that reduces your pillow to confetti is in a completely different state. High arousal destruction is almost always a signal of understimulation, frustration, or anxiety that needs an outlet. These two dogs need two very different responses. And one study explains the single most frustrating part of all of this. Researchers Kalfab and Mills, publishing in Animal Cognition in 2008, gave dogs a choice between familiar and novel objects. Dogs picked the novel item in 76% of trials. Your dog doesn't ignore its own toys because your belongings are somehow better. It ignores them because they're familiar. Your shoe is interesting for the same reason you'd choose a new restaurant over your own kitchen. Novelty is intrinsically rewarding. This is why punishment almost never fixes chronic stealing. The research points toward enrichment instead. Rotating toy selections, scent-based foraging games, structured problem-solving challenges. When a dog's need for novelty and cognitive engagement is met somewhere else, the appeal of your shoe drops significantly. Not because you hid the shoe, but because your dog's brain finally has something more interesting to do. The teenage thief. If your dog is between 6 months and 2 years old and the stealing feels relentless, there's a reason for that too. In 2020, researcher Lucy Asher and her team published a study in Biology Letters that tracked dogs through adolescence. At around 8 months, dogs became significantly less responsive to their caregivers' commands, showed more conflict-like behavior, and tested boundaries in ways that closely paralleled the dynamic between human teenagers and their parents. The effect was especially pronounced in dogs with less secure attachment to their owners. A large-scale longitudinal study published in the journal Animals in 2025 by Kinsman and colleagues, using data from the Generation Pup cohort, confirmed the pattern on a bigger scale. The highest proportion of young dogs displaying undesirable behaviors hits its peak at 12 months, with 42% showing at least one problematic behavior. After that, the numbers decline steadily. In other words, that phase where your dog seems to steal everything in sight, test every limit, and conveniently forget every command it ever learned, that's not a training failure, that's adolescence. It's a developmental window of high impulsivity, intense exploration, and still maturing self-control. And in most cases, it passes. What not to do and what actually works. Here's a detail from the research that goes against the most common instinct people have. In 2018, researcher Jacobs and colleagues published 2 companion studies in preventative veterinary medicine. Surveying 3,589 dogs, they found that physically removing objects from dogs, chasing them down, prying things from their mouths, increased resource guarding behavior over time. The dog learned that having something means conflict is coming, so it started guarding harder. But teaching a reliable drop command through exchange, trading the stolen item for something of equal or greater value, reduced guarding significantly. The dog learned that giving things up leads to good outcomes. This is why behaviorists almost universally recommend the trade protocol over the chase and grab approach. Your instinct to pursue your dog across the living room is understandable, but the research says it just makes the problem worse. When it's not a game anymore. Everything mentioned earlier describes normal behavior, but there's a boundary, and recognizing when it's been crossed matters. In 2021, researcher Sylvia Mason and her team published a study in the Journal of Veterinary Behavior. They examined 42 dogs that had undergone surgery for swallowing foreign objects and compared them against 42 matched controls using standardized behavioral assessments. In 88% of the cases, the ingestion was primarily associated with behavioral conditions, hyperactivity, impulsivity, or anxiety disorders. Only 12% were attributed mainly to digestive pain. But separate veterinary research complicates even that finding. Chronic gastrointestinal disease, conditions a dog can carry for months without visible symptoms, can also drive compulsive ingestion of non-food materials. A dog that repeatedly eats fabric, plastic, or wood isn't always a behavioral case. Sometimes it's a medical condition that looks behavioral from the outside. The markers that matter: if your dog is swallowing what it takes, not just carrying or chewing, but actually ingesting. If the behavior is repetitive and hard to interrupt, if it's getting worse over time, or if you're seeing weight loss, vomiting, or unusual tiredness alongside it, that's no longer something training can address. That needs a veterinarian, and soon. A dog that steals is doing something far more specific than being bad. Its brain treats the scent on your worn shirt the way it treats the anticipation of food. Its social intelligence is sharp enough to calculate whether you're watching before it touches the steak on the counter. 15,000 years of selective breeding gave it a grab-and-carry drive that doesn't distinguish between a duck and your slipper. And its play instinct is creative enough to turn a stolen remote into a game it designed, cast, and directed, with you in the lead role. And sometimes, at the end of the day, when it drags your sweater to its bed and curls up against it, it's not stealing at all, it's just wanting to be near you and found the closest thing it could hold on to. Subscribe if you want to keep decoding the science behind your dog's strangest habits. Drop a comment below. What's the weirdest thing your dog has ever taken? Next time, we're getting into something completely different, and the psychology behind it is stranger than you'd expect.